Jasmine Wallace never imagined that a routine flight home would end with her face stinging from a slap, her 4-year-old daughter sobbing in her arms, and the entire cabin frozen in shocked silence. But what the flight attendant didn't know was that the quiet man in seat 2, calmly filming everything on his phone, wasn't just any passenger. He was her boss's boss's boss. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe that no one should ever be treated this way, hit that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed, because stories like this need to be heard, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, this flight attendant had no idea what was coming for her. Now, let's get into how a simple trip home turned into a moment that would change everything. Jasmine Wallace stood in the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal at Gate 23. One hand gripping her carry-on bag, and the other holding tight to her daughter Amara's tiny fingers. She was exhausted, bone-tired. The kind of tired that came from pulling a double shift at Children's Memorial Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. 16 straight hours of checking vitals, administering medications, comforting frightened kids, and their even more frightened parents. Her scrubs were folded neatly in her bag, replaced now by comfortable jeans, a soft blue sweater, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her natural hair was pulled back into a neat bun, a few coils escaping to frame her face. At 32, Jasmine had the kind of beauty that didn't need makeup, though the dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many long shifts and not enough sleep. Amara, her 4-year-old daughter, was the opposite of tired. She bounced on her toes, her 2 puffballs of natural hair bobbing with each movement, the colorful beads clicking together like tiny wind chimes. She wore her favorite pink dress, the one with the sparkly unicorn on the front, and light-up sneakers that flashed with every step. "Mommy, can I get juice?" Amara asked, pointing to the newsstand across from their gate. Jasmine smiled despite her exhaustion. "Of course, baby. Let's get you something for the plane." They walked hand in hand to the small shop, where Jasmine bought a small box of apple juice and a pack of animal crackers. Amara clutched both treasures to her chest like they were gold. "Thank you, Mommy," she chirped, and Jasmine's heart swelled. This was what she worked so hard for. This little girl. This bright, beautiful, innocent little girl, who still believed the world was a kind place. The boarding announcement crackled over the speaker. "We are now boarding all zones for Flight 647 to Atlanta." Jasmine gathered their things and joined the line. They had seats in row 18 near the back of the plane. Economy. It was all she could afford on a nurse's salary, especially as a single mom. Amara's father had left when she was 6 months old, and Jasmine hadn't heard from him since. She didn't need him anyway. She and Amara were a team. They boarded the plane, shuffling down the narrow aisle past first class, where passengers sat in wide leather seats with champagne glasses already in hand. Jasmine didn't let herself feel envious. She was just grateful to be going home. Row 18. Seat B, the middle seat. Jasmine suppressed a groan. Middle seats were the worst, but she smiled at Amara and helped her into the window seat. "Look, baby, you can see the planes outside," she said, pointing. Amara pressed her face to the window, delighted. The woman in the aisle seat, an older white woman with silver hair and a pinched expression, glanced at them as Jasmine settled in. The woman's eyes flicked from Jasmine's face to Amara's, lingering on their brown skin, their natural hair. Then she pulled her designer purse closer to her body as if Jasmine might reach over and snatch it at any moment. Jasmine noticed. Of course, she noticed. She always noticed, but she said nothing. She was too tired to fight today. Jasmine began organizing their belongings, tucking her purse under the seat in front of her, placing Amara's small backpack in the overhead bin, keeping out just the juice and crackers. Amara, ever friendly, waved at the older woman. "Hi," she said, her voice bright and sweet. The woman glanced at her, then turned her head toward the window without responding. Amara's smile faltered. "Mommy, why didn't she say hi back?" Jasmine leaned down, whispering gently. "Some people are just shy, sweetheart. It's okay." But it wasn't shyness. Jasmine knew that. She'd lived 32 years in this skin. She knew the difference between shyness and disdain. A flight attendant appeared in the aisle, moving briskly toward them. She was white, maybe mid-30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight, sleek bun. Her makeup was flawless, her uniform crisp and unwrinkled. Her name tag read, Courtney Mitchell. She stopped at their row, her eyes scanning Jasmine and Amara with an expression that was anything but welcoming. "Excuse me," Courtney said, her voice sharp. "You need to stow all personal items under the seat or in the overhead bin. This isn't your living room." Jasmine looked up, confused. "I'm just getting organized. I'll have everything put away before takeoff," she said politely. Courtney didn't move. She crossed her arms, her hip jutting to one side. "I'll wait," she said coldly. "Some people need supervision." The words hit Jasmine like a slap, though not the physical kind. Not yet. She felt the eyes of nearby passengers turning toward them. Heat crept up her neck. She quickly shoved the remaining items under the seat, her hands trembling slightly. Courtney stood there the entire time, watching her expression, one of exaggerated patience, as if Jasmine were a child who needed to be monitored. When everything was finally stowed, Courtney gave a curt nod and walked away, muttering just loud enough for Jasmine to hear, always causing problems. Jasmine's chest tightened. Amara tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, why is that lady so mean to us?" Her voice was loud enough that a few passengers nearby glanced over. Jasmine's face burned. She leaned down, whispering, "Shh, baby. Some people just have bad days. Let's be kind, okay?" But Jasmine knew this wasn't about a bad day. She'd seen this before, felt it before. The subtle hostility. The way certain people looked at her and immediately decided she was less than. A problem. A nuisance. She glanced toward the front of the plane, where Courtney was now chatting and laughing with a white family in first class. Her entire demeanor transformed. Warm, friendly, human. Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Just a 2-hour flight, she told herself. Just 2 hours. She could endure anything for 2 hours. In seat 2A, near the front of the plane, a man sat with his laptop open. Xavier Montgomery was 39 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. His skin was a deep, rich brown, his close cropped hair showing just a hint of gray at the temples. He wore a watch that glinted in the overhead light, an Apple Watch that synced seamlessly with the phone resting on the armrest beside him. He'd been working on a report when the commotion started. He glanced up just in time to see the interaction between Courtney and Jasmine. He saw the discomfort on Jasmine's face, the confusion on the little girl's, and he saw the smugness on Courtney's as she walked away. Xavier's jaw tightened. He'd built his company, Montgomery Global Enterprises, from the ground up. Started with nothing but a dream and a laptop in a studio apartment in Detroit. Now he owned hotels, airlines, real estate across 3 continents. He employed thousands of people, and one of those people, he realized, was currently making a black mother feel like dirt on an airplane he technically owned. He minimized the report on his laptop and opened his phone's camera app instead. He had a feeling he might need it. The plane taxied down the runway, engines roaring as it lifted into the sky. Amara pressed her face to the window, mesmerized by the ground falling away beneath them. Jasmine tried to relax into her seat, but the tension in her shoulders wouldn't ease. The older woman beside her had angled her body as far toward the aisle as possible, as if even sharing armrest space with Jasmine was unbearable. 15 minutes into the flight, Amara tugged on Jasmine's sleeve. "Mommy, I need to go potty." Jasmine unbuckled both their seatbelts and helped Amara out of her seat. They walked toward the back of the plane, passing rows of passengers. As they approached row 12, Jasmine noticed Courtney leaning over a white family, a mother, father, and 2 young boys. Courtney was smiling, genuinely smiling, her voice warm and friendly. "Can I get you anything else? Another blanket? Some extra snacks for the boys?" the mother beamed. "Oh, you're so kind." "Yes, they'd love some cookies, if you have them." Courtney nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely, coming right up." Jasmine watched this exchange as she passed, her heart sinking. The contrast was so stark, it was almost comical. Almost. She helped Amara into the tiny lavatory waiting outside the door. When Amara emerged, her hands still damp from washing, Jasmine took her hand and they walked back to their seats. Amara settled back into her spot by the window, but after a few minutes she turned to Jasmine with wide eyes. "Mommy, I'm thirsty." Jasmine reached for the call button above her seat and pressed it. The light blinked on. They waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Jasmine glanced around, but Courtney was nowhere to be seen. Finally, Courtney appeared from the galley, walking slowly down the aisle. When she reached row 18, she stopped, her expression already annoyed. What she asked flatly. Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the rudeness. Could we please have some water for my daughter?" Courtney sighed, an exaggerated put-upon sound. "We'll be starting beverage service in 20 minutes. You can wait." Jasmine kept her voice calm, though frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "She's 4 years old and she's thirsty now. Just a small cup would be fine." Courtney's eyes narrowed. "I said wait. Or you should have bought water before boarding." Jasmine had bought juice, but Amara had finished it before they even took off. She opened her mouth to explain, but Courtney had already turned to walk away. Before she could take more than 2 steps, a voice called out from the front of the plane. "Excuse me, miss." It was Xavier. He'd stood up from his seat in first class and stepped into the aisle. Courtney spun around, her irritation melting instantly when she saw him. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the aura of someone important. "Yes, sir," she asked, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "How can I help you?" Xavier smiled politely. "I'd like some water, please. And could you bring 2 cups, one for me and one for the young lady back there?" He gestured toward Jasmine. Courtney's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with something cold. "Of course, sir." Right away, she disappeared into the galley and returned less than 2 minutes later with a small tray. On it were 2 bottles of chilled water, a glass with ice, and a slice of lemon for Xavier, and a single small plastic cup of lukewarm water for Jasmine. Courtney handed Xavier his water with a bright smile. "Here you go, sir. Let me know if you need anything else." Then she turned to Jasmine and practically slammed the plastic cup down on her tray table. Water sloshed over the sides, spilling onto Jasmine's jeans. "Here," Courtney snapped. "Happy now." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Jasmine stared down at the spilled water, her hands trembling as she reached for a napkin to blot the wetness from her lap. Amara picked up the cup and took a small sip, her face scrunched in confusion.
"Mommy, why is her water cold and mine isn't?"
Jasmine didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had an answer, but it wasn't one she wanted to explain to her 4-year-old daughter. Xavier, still standing in the aisle, caught Jasmine's eye. He gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that said, "I see you. I see what's happening here." Jasmine nodded back, grateful but also humiliated. She hated that a stranger had to intervene just so her daughter could have water. She hated that Courtney had treated them like they were less than human. And she hated that this wasn't even the first time something like this had happened. It was just the worst. The older woman beside Jasmine made a tisking sound under her breath. "These people," she muttered, shaking her head, "always want special treatment." Jasmine heard her, loud and clear. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to say something. She wanted to scream. And because she knew that if she spoke up, she'd be labeled as aggressive, angry, difficult, so she stayed silent and hated herself a little for it. 30 minutes later, the beverage cart finally made its way down the aisle. Courtney pushed it alongside Brett, a younger male flight attendant with sandy brown hair and an easy smile. Brett handled the rows ahead of them with warmth and efficiency, asking passengers what they wanted, laughing at a joke from an elderly man offering extra napkins to a woman with a toddler. But when the cart reached row 18, Courtney stepped in front of Brett. "I'll handle this row," she said, her voice low but firm. Brett glanced at her, then at Jasmine, and frowned slightly. But he didn't argue. He moved to the other side of the aisle. Courtney turned to Jasmine, her expression blank. "Drink?" she asked, her tone devoid of any warmth. "Apple juice for my daughter, please," Jasmine said quietly. "And coffee for me. Black, no sugar." Courtney poured a tiny amount of apple juice into the smallest cup available and slapped it onto Jasmine's tray table. Then she poured coffee into a flimsy styrofoam cup and handed it over without a word. Jasmine accepted both, then hesitated. "Could we also get some pretzels or crackers for her?" she asked. "She hasn't eaten in a while." Courtney's lips pressed into a thin line. "Snacks are $5. Jasmine blinked. "I'm sorry, what I thought snacks were complimentary on this route." Courtney shrugged. "Not anymore. New policy. $5. Jasmine glanced past Courtney to the row in front of them, where a young white boy was happily munching on a pack of pretzels and chocolate chip cookies. His mother hadn't paid a dime. Jasmine pointed. That child just got snacks for free. Courtney didn't even bother looking. His parents are premium members. "Are you a premium member?" Her voice dripped with condescension. Jasmine felt her face grow hot. She wasn't a premium member. She could barely afford the base fare. But she wasn't about to let her daughter go hungry because of some made-up policy. She opened her purse and pulled out a $5 bill, handing it to Courtney. Courtney snatched the money and tossed a single small pack of pretzels onto the tray table like she was throwing scraps to a dog. Then she moved the cart forward without another word. Amara opened the pack carefully, her little fingers struggling with the plastic. She managed to pull it open, and a few pretzels tumbled out. One rolled off the tray and onto the floor. Before Jasmine could even reach down to pick it up, Courtney whipped around. "Control your child," she snapped, her voice loud enough that several passengers turned to look. "This isn't a zoo," Jasmine's patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. She stood up, her voice steady but firm. "She's 4 years old. It was an accident. I'll clean it up." Courtney stepped closer, her face inches from Jasmine's. "You need to teach her manners. Kids like that always make a mess." The words hung in the air like poison. "Kids like that." Jasmine's hands shook. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and controlled. "What do you mean by kids like that?" Courtney smirked. "Kids who aren't taught how to behave in public." Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "My daughter is well behaved. You, on the other hand, have been rude and discriminatory since the moment we boarded this plane. I want to speak to the senior flight attendant." Courtney's face flushed red. "Are you accusing me of something?" Her voice rose, drawing even more attention. Jasmine didn't back down. "I'm saying you've treated us differently from every other passenger on this plane, and I have a right to file a complaint." Courtney stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You need to sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from this flight for causing a disturbance." Jasmine stared at her in disbelief. "I'm causing a disturbance. You've been harassing us since we sat down." From the front of the plane, Xavier stood up. He'd been watching the entire exchange, his phone in his hand, recording. He walked down the aisle, his presence commanding. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Courtney spun around, startled. When she saw Xavier, her demeanor shifted slightly. "Sir, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." Xavier didn't move. "Actually, I've been watching, and this passenger is right. Your behavior has been inappropriate from the start." Courtney's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like he had money and power. "Sir, I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm just doing my job." Xavier's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Your job is to serve passengers with respect and dignity. You've done neither." Courtney's face went from red to white. She looked around, realizing that multiple passengers were now staring, some with their own phones out recording. Panic flickered in her eyes. She turned back to Jasmine, her voice shaking. "You need to sit down. Now." Jasmine crossed her arms. "No, not until you apologize and get me the senior flight attendant." Courtney's control finally shattered. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Passengers in nearby rows had stopped what they were doing, all eyes locked on the confrontation unfolding in the aisle. Courtney's face was flushed, her breathing heavy. Jasmine stood her ground, arms crossed, her chin lifted despite the fear coursing through her veins. She wasn't aggressive, she wasn't even loud, but she was done being silent. "You're making a scene," Courtney hissed, her voice shaking. "Sit down before I call the captain." Jasmine's voice was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest.
I am perfectly calm. You are the one who needs to check your behavior. I've asked for the senior flight attendant. Get them. Now.
Courtney's eyes darted around the cabin looking for support for someone to validate her. But all she saw were passengers, staring back, some with expressions of disgust, others with their phones raised, recording. An older black man in row 20 whispered to his wife, "She's about to lose her job." A white woman in row 16 shook her head, murmuring, "This is disgusting." Amara, still buckled into her seat, began to cry. The raised voices, the tension, the angry faces, it was all too much for a 4-year-old to process. "Mommy," she whimpered, her voice thick with tears. "Mommy, I'm scared." Jasmine's heart broke. She immediately knelt down beside her daughter, her voice soft and soothing. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Everything's okay." But everything wasn't okay. And Courtney, seeing Jasmine kneel down, saw it as an opportunity to twist the narrative.
"Oh, now you're using your child to manipulate the situation," Courtney said loudly, her voice dripping with venom. Typical Jasmine straightened up slowly, her eyes blazing.
"What did you just say?" Courtney, emboldened by her own fury, doubled down. "You heard me. People like you always play the victim card." The cabin went silent. Every single person heard it. Jasmine took a step forward, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "People like me. Say it clearly." "What do you mean?" Courtney's mouth twisted into a sneer. "You know exactly what I mean." Jasmine's voice rose, no longer able to contain her anger. "No, say it, out loud. Tell everyone on this plane what you really mean when you say people like me." Courtney's face contorted with rage and panic. She felt cornered, exposed, and instead of backing down, she lashed out. And then it happened. Courtney's hand shot out, and before anyone could react, she slapped Jasmine across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. For a moment, the world stopped. Jasmine stood frozen, her hand slowly rising to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Amara screamed, a raw, terrified scream that cut through the silence like a knife. "Mommy!" Passengers gasped. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Another voice yelled, "Did she just hit her?" Xavier, who had been standing a few feet away, immediately raised his phone higher, making sure every second was captured on video. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Brett, the other flight attendant, rushed over his face, pale. "Courtney, what the hell did you just do?" Courtney seemed to realize all at once what she'd done. Her hand was still raised, trembling in the air. She looked at Jasmine, then at the passengers, then at Brett. Panic flooded her features. She was threatening me," Courtney stammered, her voice high and desperate. "I felt unsafe. She was getting aggressive." Xavier stepped forward, his voice cold and cutting. "That's a lie. I have the entire thing on video. She never touched you. She never even moved toward you aggressively." Brett grabbed Courtney's arm, his voice low and urgent. "Courtney, go to the back, now. I'm reporting this to the captain immediately." Courtney's eyes were wild, but she was. "I had to protect myself. She was causing a scene." A passenger from row 17, a middle-aged white woman with glasses, stood up. "That's not true. I saw everything. You attacked her for no reason." Another passenger, a young black man in row 19, held up his phone. "I got it on video too. She didn't do anything." Now let me ask you something. If you were on that plane, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken up? Comment number 1 if you believe Jasmine deserves justice, and smash that like button if you think Courtney should face serious consequences for what she did. And make sure you're subscribed, because you need to see how this story ends. Do you think the airline will take this seriously? Do you think Courtney will actually be held accountable? Or will this be swept under the rug like so many other incidents? Keep watching, because what happens next will shock you. Courtney, realizing the entire cabin had turned against her, began to back away. I didn't mean. But her words were drowned out by the rising murmur of outraged passengers. Jasmine, still standing in the aisle, finally broke. She sank to her knees, pulling Amara into her arms. Her daughter clung to her, sobbing uncontrollably. Jasmine's own tears fell silently. Not from physical pain, but from the sheer humiliation and trauma of being assaulted in front of her child. In front of everyone. Xavier knelt down beside them, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Jasmine shook her head, unable to speak. Xavier placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything right now. I have proof. I promise you this won't go unpunished." Jasmine looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. "Who are you?" Xavier pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My name is Xavier Montgomery. I'm the CEO of Montgomery Global Enterprises. This airline is one of our subsidiary companies." Jasmine stared at the card, then at Xavier, as the weight of his words sank in. Brett helped Jasmine to her feet, his face etched with shame and concern. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. Never." He glanced at Amara, who was still clinging to her mother, her small body shaking. "Please let me move you both to first class. You shouldn't have to stay here." Jasmine nodded, numbly, too shocked to protest. Brett gently guided her and Amara up the aisle, past the rows of staring passengers. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable, as if witnessing this trauma made them complicit. Xavier followed close behind his presence, a quiet shield. Brett led them to row 2, where there were 2 empty seats beside Xavier's. He helped Jasmine settle in, then brought a cold compress wrapped in a clean cloth. "For your face," he said, softly placing it in her hands. Jasmine pressed it against her stinging cheek, the coolness offering a small relief. Amara climbed into her lap, refusing to let go. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. Jasmine forced a smile, though her lips trembled. "I'm okay, baby. Mommy's okay." But she wasn't okay. Her hands were shaking, her mind was racing. She kept replaying the moment over and over. The slap, the sting, the sound, the look on Courtney's face. Brett brought them both water and a warm blanket for Amara. "Is there anything else I can get you?" he asked. "Anything at all," Jasmine shook her head. Just make sure she doesn't come near us again." Brett's expression darkened. "She won't. I promise." He turned to Xavier. "Sir, I've already radioed the captain. He's coming out now." True to his word, minutes later, Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He approached Jasmine's seat, his face grave. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Reynolds. I've been informed of the incident, and I want to start by offering my sincerest apologies on behalf of this airline. What happened to you is completely unacceptable." Jasmine looked up at him, exhausted. "Thank you." Captain Reynolds pulled out a small notebook. "I need to get your statement so I can file a full report. Can you walk me through what happened from the beginning?" Jasmine took a shaky breath and recounted everything. The hostility from the moment they boarded. The refusal to bring water. The snack incident. The escalating confrontations. And finally, the slap. Captain Reynolds listened intently, writing down every detail. When she finished, he looked at her with something close to sorrow. "I'm deeply sorry you had to experience this. The flight attendant in question has been confined to the rear galley for the remainder of the flight. She will not be allowed near you or your daughter." Jasmine nodded. "Thank you." Captain Reynolds hesitated, then asked gently, "Ma'am, do you want to press charges? We can have airport police waiting when we land in Atlanta." Jasmine froze. Pressing charges meant police reports, lawyers, possibly court appearances. It meant reliving this nightmare over and over. But then she looked at Amara, who was curled up against her chest, her eyes red and swollen. And she thought about every other black woman who had been treated this way and stayed silent because it was easier, because it was safer. Xavier, sitting beside her, spoke quietly. "You should. What she did was assault. And it needs to be on record not just for you, but for every other person she might treat this way in the future." Captain Reynolds nodded. "He's right, ma'am. And I assure you she will be terminated immediately upon landing. But a police report will ensure there are legal consequences as well." Jasmine looked down at Amara, then back at the captain. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "Okay, Yes, I'll press charges.
Captain Reynolds gave a firm nod. I'll radio ahead. Officers will meet us at the gate. He turned to Xavier, his expression shifting slightly. And you are, sir.
Xavier met his gaze evenly. Xavier Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Global Enterprises. The color drained from Captain Reynolds's face. Sir, I had no idea you were on this flight. Xavier's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, clearly. And that's part of the problem, isn't it, Captain? If you'd known I was here, would this have happened? Captain Reynolds stammered, Sir, I didn't mean to imply. Xavier held up a hand. I know what you meant, and we'll be discussing this situation in depth when we land. I want a full report on Miss Mitchell's employment history. Every complaint filed against her. Every incident. And I want to know why she was still working if there's a pattern of behavior. Captain Reynolds nodded quickly.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I'll have everything ready for you.
Xavier leaned back in his seat, his jaw tight. Good, because if this is how passengers are being treated on planes I own, then we have a much bigger problem than one rogue flight attendant. Captain Reynolds swallowed hard, nodded again, and retreated back to the cockpit. The cabin was quieter now, the initial shock wearing off, but the tension remained. Passengers whispered among themselves. Some glanced back at Jasmine with sympathy. Others avoided looking at her altogether, as if her trauma was something they didn't want to acknowledge. Xavier turned to Jasmine. How's your daughter Jasmine? Looked down at Amara, who had finally stopped crying, but was staring blankly at nothing. She's scared. She's never seen anyone treat me like that. Xavier's expression softened. And she shouldn't have to. No child should witness their parent being assaulted. Jasmine's voice broke. I just wanted to get home. That's all. I just wanted to take my daughter home. Xavier placed a gentle hand on her arm. I know, and I'm going to make sure the people responsible for this answer for it. Amara, her voice barely a whisper, looked up at Xavier. Are you a good guy? Xavier smiled, a real, genuine smile. I try to be, sweetheart. Your mom is very brave. Amara looked at her mother, then back at Xavier. I know. She's the bravest. Jasmine's tears fell again, but this time they were mixed with something else. Gratitude, relief, and the smallest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, justice would actually be served. In the rear galley of the plane, Courtney Mitchell sat on a small fold-down seat, her hands trembling in her lap. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Brett stood across from her arms, crossed his expression, a mixture of anger and disappointment. Patricia, the senior flight attendant, a black woman in her late 40s with an air of quiet authority, stood beside him. Patricia's face was hard, her eyes unforgiving. What were you thinking, Courtney? Patricia asked, her voice low but sharp. Courtney looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know. She kept pushing, and I snapped. Brett shook his head in disbelief. She didn't push anything. She asked for water and snacks, and you treated her like garbage from the moment she stepped on board. Courtney's voice rose defensive. That's not true. I treat all passengers the same. Patricia stepped closer, her voice cutting. Really? Because I've been watching you for months, Courtney, and I've seen how you interact with certain passengers versus others. Courtney's face flushed. What are you implying? Patricia didn't flinch. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. You have a pattern of treating black passengers differently. And today, you crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Courtney began to cry harder, her voice breaking. I'm not racist. I'm not. Brett's voice was cold. Then why did you slap her? Courtney covered her face, with her hands sobbing. She was getting aggressive. She was in my face. Patricia pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times, then turned it toward Courtney. I saw the video Brett sent me. She was standing still, talking. You assaulted her. Courtney stared at the screen, watching herself slap Jasmine. The sound, the shock on Jasmine's face, the scream from the little girl. She looked away, unable to watch. Okay, I made a mistake, she said, her voice desperate. Can't we just handle this internally? I'll apologize. I'll do whatever it takes. Patricia's expression didn't soften. Too late.
The CEO of the parent company is on this flight, Xavier Montgomery. He witnessed everything, and he recorded it. Courtney's face went white. What Brett nodded grimly. Xavier Montgomery, seat 2A. He's the one who helped her, and he has the whole thing on video. Courtney started hyperventilating, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. No. This can't be happening. Patricia leaned down, her voice firm. It is happening. And you did this to yourself. Courtney grabbed Patricia's arm, her voice pleading. Please, Patricia. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I'll lose everything. Patricia pulled her arm away. You should have thought about that before you put your hands on a passenger. Courtney looked at Brett, tears streaming down her face. Can I go apologize? Maybe if I explain? Brett shook his head. Absolutely not. You're staying here until we land. You've done enough damage. Courtney broke down completely, her sobs echoing in the small galley. My career is over. My life is over. Patricia's voice was cold. Your career is over. Your life will go on. But that woman and her child will remember this trauma forever. Courtney looked up, her face, a mess of tears and smudged makeup. I'm not a bad person. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me. I never learned how to. Patricia cut her off sharply. Don't you dare try to excuse this with your upbringing. Plenty of people grow up in homogeneous communities and still manage to treat others with basic human respect. Brett added, his voice hard. You had training. Every flight attendant goes through diversity and inclusion training. Multiple times. Courtney's voice was barely a whisper. I know, but it's different when it's real people, not a seminar. Patricia stood up, towering over her. Then you were never qualified for this job. This industry requires you to serve everyone with dignity. If you can't do that, you don't belong here. Courtney slumped in her seat, her hands covering her face. She knew it was over. No one was going to defend her. No one was going to save her. She destroyed her own life in a moment of rage and prejudice, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. Brett and Patricia left the galley, closing the curtain behind them. Courtney sat alone, the hum of the plane's engines, the only sound. She thought about her apartment, her car payment, her friends and family back home. What would they think? What would they say? She thought about the video. It would be everywhere. Her face, her name, her shame. She'd never work in this industry again, maybe never work anywhere again, and worst of all, she couldn't even claim it was a misunderstanding. The video showed everything. Her cruelty, her aggression, her assault. She had no defense, no excuse, just consequences. The plane began its descent into Atlanta. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The cabin was quieter than usual. Passengers who'd witnessed the incident sat in somber silence, many still processing what they'd seen. Jasmine sat in first class, Amara curled up in her lap, finally asleep after exhausting herself from crying. Jasmine stared out the window, watching the city come into view below. Her cheeks still stung. Her heart still raced. But there was something else now, too. A strange sense of calm. She'd stood up for herself. She'd refused to be silent. And for the first time in her life, someone with power had stood beside her. Xavier sat in the seat next to her, typing on his laptop. He glanced over. How are you holding up? Jasmine let out a long breath. I don't know. Numb, I think. Xavier nodded. That's normal. You've been through a trauma. Jasmine looked down at Amara. I keep thinking about her. What this is going to do to her. She's so young. Xavier's voice was gentle. Kids are resilient, and she has a strong mother. She'll be okay. Jasmine hoped he was right. The plane touched down with a slight bump, the wheels screeching against the runway. As they taxied to the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated after we reach the gate. We have a situation that requires airport authorities to board first. Thank you for your patience. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers looked confused. Others, those who'd witnessed the incident, understood. The plane came to a stop. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but no one stood up. Moments later, the forward door opened and two uniformed police officers boarded, followed by airport security and a sharply dressed woman in her 50s carrying a briefcase. The officers approached Jasmine's row. "Ma'am, are you Jasmine Wallace?" One of them asked, his tone respectful. "Yes," Jasmine said quietly. The officer nodded. "We're here regarding an assault complaint." "Can you tell us what happened?" Jasmine recounted the story once more, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion. Amara stirred in her lap, blinking awake. The officer took notes, then turned to Xavier. "And you have video evidence." Xavier nodded, pulling out his phone. "Right here." He handed it to the officer. Both officers watched the video, their expressions growing serious. One of them let out a low whistle. "This is clear-cut assault. We'll need to take the flight attendant into custody." The sharply dressed woman stepped forward. "Officers, I'm Diane Fletcher, Vice President of Customer Relations for the airline. We fully cooperate with your investigation. We've already initiated termination procedures." The officers nodded and made their way to the rear of the plane. Minutes later, they returned, escorting Courtney Mitchell. She was in handcuffs, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. As she was led past Jasmine's row, she stopped, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." Jasmine looked up at her, her voice calm but firm. "You did mean it. That's the problem." Courtney's face crumpled, and the officers led her away. The passengers began to disembark. As Jasmine gathered her things, several people stopped to speak to her. An elderly white woman with kind eyes pressed a piece of paper into her hand. "I have 3 videos from different angles. Here's my contact information. I'll testify if you need me to. Senshin accident. I have note in stive. Interest in furs. Senshin accident. Senshin accident." A black man in his 40s nodded at her. "I've experienced this too. Not to this extreme, but I see you. We see you." A young Latina woman squeezed her shoulder. "You were so brave. Thank you for not staying silent." Jasmine was overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of solidarity, of being seen. Xavier stayed close, shielding her and Amara from the crowd as they exited the plane. At the gate, Diane Fletcher approached again, her expression apologetic. "Miss Wallace, I'm Diane Fletcher, Vice President of Customer Relations. On behalf of the airline, I offer our deepest apologies. We'd like to discuss compensation and—" Xavier cut her off, his voice sharp. "She'll have legal representation before any discussions of compensation. Don't try to buy her silence." Diane blinked, taken aback. "Sir, we're not trying to." Xavier's eyes were hard. "Yes, you are. And it won't work." Diane shifted uncomfortably, realizing she wasn't going to get anywhere with Xavier present. "Of course. We simply want to make this right." Xavier's voice softened slightly, but remained firm. "Making it right means systemic change, not a check. We'll be in touch." Diane nodded and stepped back, retreating into the terminal. Xavier turned to Jasmine. "Where are you parked?" Jasmine wiped her eyes. "Economy Lot D." Xavier gestured toward the exit. "I have a driver waiting. Let me take you to your car." Jasmine wanted to refuse to insist she could manage on her own, but she was so tired, so drained. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." Xavier led them through the terminal, his presence commanding enough that people moved out of the way. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man in a suit, opened the door for them. Jasmine and Amara climbed into the back seat. The leather was soft, the interior cool and quiet. Amara looked around wide-eyed. "Mommy, this car is fancy." Jasmine managed a small smile. "It is, isn't it?" Xavier gave the driver directions to the economy lot, and they pulled away from the terminal. The ride was quiet. Jasmine stared out the window, watching the city pass by. She felt like she was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She wasn't sure anymore. When they reached her car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dent in the back bumper, Xavier got out and helped her with her bags. "Do you have everything you need?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. "Yes, thank you. For everything." Xavier handed her his business card. "My personal number is on the back. If you need anything at all, call me. I meant what I said. This won't go unpunished." Jasmine looked at the card, then at Xavier. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Xavier's expression softened. "I know what it's like to be invisible until someone decides you're a problem. I grew up poor in Detroit, worked my way through college, built my company from nothing, and every step of the way someone told me I didn't belong. Your story isn't just yours, it's mine. It's millions of people's, and if I have the power to change the system, I have to try." Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered. Xavier nodded. "You did the hard part. You stood up. Don't let anyone make you regret that." He climbed back into the car and Jasmine watched as it drove away. Then she unlocked her Honda, buckled Amara into her car seat, and sat behind the wheel. For a long moment, she just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then she started the car and drove home. 1 week later, Xavier Montgomery sat in his corner office on the 45th floor of Montgomery Global Headquarters in downtown Atlanta. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but Xavier wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at the data on his laptop screen, and what he saw made his blood boil. In the past 2 years, 73 complaints had been filed by passengers of color regarding discriminatory treatment by flight staff on the airline his company owned. 73. And out of those 73 complaints, only 4 had resulted in terminations. 4. That was a 5% accountability rate. Unacceptable. Xavier picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Schedule an emergency board meeting. Today, everyone from the airline subsidiary, CEO, COO, VP of HR, VP of Operations. I don't care if they have to cancel other meetings. Make it happen." 2 hours later, the conference room was filled. Richard Brennan, the airline's CEO, sat at the far end of the table, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him were the COO, the VP of Human Resources, and the VP of Operations. They all looked nervous. They should be. Xavier stood at the head of the table, his laptop connected to the large screen behind him. He didn't sit down. He wanted them to feel the weight of this moment. "Gentlemen, Lady Xavier," began his voice calm but cold. "We have a crisis. But it's not the PR crisis you think it is." Richard Brennan cleared his throat. "Sir, we've already fired the employee involved, issued a public apology, offered compensation to the passenger." Xavier held up a hand, cutting him off. "And none of that addresses the root problem." He clicked a button on his laptop, and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. Data, numbers, charts. In the past 2 years, we've had 73 complaints filed by passengers of color regarding discriminatory treatment by flight staff. 73. He let that number hang in the air. How many resulted in terminations? The VP of HR shifted uncomfortably. 4, sir. Xavier's eyes were hard. 4. Out of 73. That's a 5% accountability rate. He clicked to the next slide. Courtney Mitchell, the flight attendant who assaulted Jasmine Wallace, had 12 complaints filed against her in 18 months. 12. Why was she still employed? The VP of HR stammered. We sent her to additional training, sir. Diversity and inclusion seminars." Xavier's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Training doesn't fix bigotry. It just teaches bigots how to hide it better." The COO spoke up, his tone defensive. "Sir, with respect, we can't just fire people based on accusations." Xavier leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "These aren't accusations. These are documented complaints with witness statements. And in Courtney's case, video evidence of assault." He straightened up his voice, dropping lower. "Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, we implement a 3-strike system. Any employee with substantiated complaints of discriminatory behavior gets Strike 1 and mandatory training. Strike 2, suspension without pay and final warning. Strike 3, immediate termination. Richard Brennan frowned. Sir, that seems harsh. Xavier's eyes snapped to him. Harsh? You know what's harsh. A 4-year-old watching her mother get slapped on an airplane because a flight attendant couldn't control her prejudice. That's harsh. Silence. No one dared to argue. Xavier clicked to the next slide. Additionally, we're implementing body cameras for all flight attendants. Voluntary at first, mandatory within 6 months. The VP of Operations leaned forward. Sir, the union will fight that. Xavier's voice was firm. Let them. I'll negotiate directly. Flight attendants who have nothing to hide will welcome the protection. Those who don't, well, that tells us everything we need to know. He clicked to another slide. We're also establishing a passenger advocacy office, independent from customer service, staffed by civil rights attorneys. Any complaint of discrimination goes through them first, and they have the authority to launch investigations and recommend terminations. Richard Brennan's face had gone pale. Sir, this will cost millions. Xavier turned to face him fully. You know what costs more? Lawsuits? Loss of customer trust? Federal investigations? This incident opened the door for the Department of Transportation to audit us. Do you want them to find what I found? No one answered. Xavier let the silence stretch. Then he sat down, his voice quieter but no less intense. Jasmine Wallace is a pediatric nurse. She saves children's lives for a living. She flew coach because she just worked a double shift and wanted to get home to rest. And one of our employees assaulted her because she had the audacity to ask for water for her daughter. Xavier's eyes swept the room. If you don't understand why that's unacceptable, you're part of the problem. And if you're part of the problem, you won't be part of this company much longer. The VP of HR spoke quickly. Sir, we understand. We'll implement everything you've outlined. Xavier nodded. Good. Because I'm not finished. Jasmine Wallace deserves more than compensation. She deserves a public apology from this company at the highest level. Richard, you'll do a press conference. You'll take full responsibility for the culture that allowed this to happen. Richard's face went white. Sir, that could expose us to additional liability. Xavier's voice was steel. To honesty. To accountability. Yes. Do it anyway. Because if we're not willing to own our failures, we don't deserve to be in business. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You have 72 hours to draft the new policies and schedule the press conference. I'll be reviewing everything personally. Don't disappoint me. The executives filed out their expressions grim. Xavier stayed behind, staring at the data on the screen. 73 complaints. 73 people who'd been made to feel less than human on planes he owned. That number was going to be 0. He'd make sure of it. 2 months later, Jasmine stood in her small backyard watching Amara chase butterflies through the grass. The little girl's laughter rang out bright and carefree, and Jasmine felt her chest loosen just a little. The therapy sessions were helping. Both of them. Amara was starting to sleep through the night again, and Jasmine's nightmares were becoming less frequent. The sound of the doorbell pulled Jasmine from her thoughts. She walked through the house and opened the front door to find a courier standing on her porch holding a thick envelope. Jasmine Wallace, he asked. Yes, that's me. He handed her the envelope. Sign here, please. Jasmine signed and closed the door, staring at the return address. Montgomery Global Enterprises. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal letter on embossed stationery, signed by Richard Brennan and the entire board of directors. It was an apology, a real one. Not corporate speak, but actual words of remorse and accountability. Beneath that was a personal letter, handwritten from Xavier. Dear Jasmine, it began. No amount of money can undo what happened to you and Amara. But I hope this settlement provides some measure of security and acknowledgement of the harm caused. Additionally, I'd like to discuss something with you. We're building a passenger advocacy office, and I believe your perspective as someone who experienced discrimination firsthand would be invaluable. This isn't charity. This is offering you a position where you can help prevent others from experiencing what you went through. If you're interested, please call me. Sincerely, Xavier Montgomery. Jasmine sat down on the couch, the letter shaking in her hands. At the bottom of the envelope was a check, $250,000. She stared at it, unable to process the number. Her phone rang. Xavier's name appeared on the screen. She answered her voice, barely a whisper. "Hello, hi Jasmine. Did you receive the letter?" Xavier's voice was warm, familiar now. "Just now. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. But I meant what I wrote. I'd like you to consider the position." Jasmine hesitated. "I'm a nurse. I don't know anything about corporate advocacy." Xavier's voice was gentle. "You know what it's like to be on the receiving end of discrimination. You know how the system fails people. That's more valuable than any business degree." Jasmine looked out the window at Amara, who was lying in the grass, now staring up at the clouds. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take your time." There was a pause. Then Jasmine asked, "Xavier, why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Xavier's voice was quiet. "I know what it's like to be invisible until someone decides you're a problem. I grew up poor in Detroit, worked my way through college, built my company from nothing. And every step of the way, someone told me I didn't belong. Your story isn't just yours. It's mine. It's millions of people's. And if I have the power to change the system, I have to try." Tears streamed down Jasmine's face. "Thank you. No. Thank you. For not staying silent. For pressing charges. For being brave." They hung up. Amara came running inside, her cheeks flushed from the sun. "Mommy, who was that?" Jasmine smiled, wiping her tears. "Remember the nice man on the airplane?" Amara's face lit up. "The good guy, yes, the good guy. He wants Mommy to help other people, so what happened to us doesn't happen to them." Amara climbed onto the couch, snuggling into her mother's side. "Will you do it, Jasmine?" Looked down at her daughter, thought about all the times she'd stayed silent in the face of microaggressions, all the times she'd taught Amara to be the bigger person instead of standing up. "Yes, baby, I think I will." 6 months later, Jasmine sat in her office on the 20th floor of Montgomery Global Headquarters. The walls were covered with photos of diverse families' thank you letters from passengers, framed copies of the new policies she'd helped create. Courtney Mitchell had pled guilty to assault, received community service and probation, and was permanently banned from working in the airline industry. The airline had implemented all of Xavier's changes, becoming the first major carrier with mandatory body cameras and an independent advocacy office. A news segment played on the TV in Jasmine's office. Montgomery Global Airlines reports a 75% decrease in discrimination complaints since implementing sweeping policy changes earlier this year. There was a knock on the door. Xavier stepped in, a smile on his face. Busy Jasmine looked up from her desk. "Always. Good busy, though." Xavier nodded. "I knew you'd be perfect for this." Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "I got an email today from a woman who filed a complaint 3 weeks ago. She thanked us, said it was the first time she felt heard." Xavier's smile widened. "That's why we do this." Jasmine looked at the photo on her desk. Her and Amara at the airport boarding a flight for their first vacation in years, both of them smiling. "You know what the wildest part is," Jasmine said. "What I'm not afraid to fly anymore. After everything, I thought I'd never want to step on a plane again. But now I feel like I took something back." Xavier nodded. "You took everything back. Your dignity, your voice, your power." Jasmine smiled. "We did. Together." Just then, Amara burst through the door, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She'd just come from the after-school program in the building. "Mommy, guess what we learned today?" Jasmine laughed. "What, baby?" "How to stand up for what's right even when it's scary." Jasmine and Xavier exchanged a knowing look. Jasmine pulled Amara into her lap. "That's the most important lesson you'll ever learn, sweetheart." Amara looked up at Xavier. "Are you still a good guy?" Xavier grinned. "I'm trying to be." Amara nodded seriously. "You are. You and Mommy are both good guys." As Xavier left the office, Jasmine sat with her daughter looking out the window at the city below. She thought about that day on the plane, the slap, the humiliation, the fear, but she also thought about what came after. the courage, the solidarity, the change. She'd learned something important that day. Staying silent didn't keep you safe. It just made you invisible. And she was done being invisible. Her voiceover echoed softly as the scene faded. They say courage is standing up when you're scared. But real courage is standing up even when you know it might not change anything. Because sometimes it changes everything. So let me ask you this. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you'd spoken up? Comment below and share your story. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Subscribe to this channel, because stories like Jasmine's need to be told, and there are so many more people out there who deserve to have their voices heard. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing that change is possible. May you always have the courage to stand up, speak out, and demand the dignity you deserve. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Jasmine's story teaches us that silence in the face of injustice doesn't protect us, it only makes us invisible. When discrimination happens, whether it's blatant like a physical assault or subtle like microaggressions, speaking up is not just an act of courage, it's a necessity. Too often, victims stay quiet because they fear being labeled as difficult, angry, or problematic. But Jasmine showed us that our dignity is worth fighting for, especially when our children are watching. Her decision to press charges and work with Xavier to create systemic change transformed a traumatic experience into a catalyst for justice. The lesson here is clear. Individual acts of bravery can lead to institutional transformation. We must document incidents, seek allies, and refuse to accept discrimination as normal. Xavier's response also teaches us about the responsibility that comes with power. When you have influence, use it to dismantle systems that harm marginalized people. Finally, this story reminds us that accountability matters. Courtney faced consequences not because the system worked perfectly, but because people refused to look away. Real change happens when we stand together, demand better, and refuse to let injustice go unchallenged. Your voice matters, your experience matters, and when you speak up, you create space for others to do the same. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination while traveling? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below, because your voice deserves to be heard. If Jasmine's courage inspired you, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better and do better. Share this video with your friends, your family, anyone who needs to know that standing up for yourself is not just okay, it's powerful. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for believing that we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. May you always find the strength to stand tall, speak truth, and demand justice. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep fighting the good fight.